Alright, to get started, let's go ahead and check on the character right now, just make sure that it works the way it's supposed to. If you go ahead and go to your play option, and just click on the play button there, your character should be able to go ahead and walk around, go from a walking point to a jog, to a run. The sprint's not enabled though. You should also be able to do a single jump, where the player will just do a single jump like that. Those are the ones that are already set up for us. Now notice, we don't have our crouch, we don't have our crouch jump or any of those that we've looked at. What we want to do, let's go ahead and turn off the play mode here. We'll go ahead and just go down the list, and we're just going to work on each one of the functions one at a time. Usually when I start in, if I was starting in on someone else's script, again, like I said before, I would go through and make sure I really understand their word usage, try to complement what's being done. And if it's being done well, then just continue with that style. It may not be exactly the style that that's comfortable with you, but if you're trying to keep a consistency with what's already been created, then try to just find those words they're using and use those same things. What we have here for ours is going to be, let's see, if we go down to our functions, what we have inside of here is a finished idle, walk, jog, and run, but we don't have a finished sprint. The sprint is actually a really good one to try to figure out because it's a simple one. There's basically 3 other examples that are already done in a similar manner, so it's really just us trying to plug in that same type of thing into it. So let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and just start in with some basic writing on the sprint. And along the way, we'll just kind of pop back up and down. One of the things in terms of where the variables are, one of the things you may have to find yourself doing is, for instance, looking at, here we'll go back down to here, if I'm inside of, say, the walk, the first option that comes up inside of walk is actually a check on whether or not the player can walk. If you notice inside the inspector, all of our action items, all the items that we can do for the character, is basically all the functions. Those all have an option to toggle on and off, just an enable on and off type. That way, whenever you're working with the character, if you don't want the character to do a crouch jump, we'll be able to go down to the crouch jump option and just uncheck it or check it. If we want to have, for instance, the can crouch hold key, so maybe you have to hold it down to crouch instead of just single push, then you can have it turned on or off. So having all those options available on design side, very important. I realize that you may be just a programmer only, and it would be almost easier just in code while you're there. But longer term, if you're wanting reusability, if you want to be able to have someone take this and work with it on design side, really important to start putting things inside the inspector. So back to this one. If we look at this one, we'll just go ahead and break down kind of what's happening. Our first thing that comes up is checking whether the player can walk. If not, then it'll just go ahead and bypass it. The next thing that we have is going to be checking that the speed is within the walking range. So for instance, our move speed, and this is where you'll want to kind of go back and forth here. The move speed itself, if you notice, this is a static public variable move speed. It's going to be a float. It's inside of our current controller system. If it's greater than the idle max speed, so idling is going to be from 0 to, let's double check. And let's see, our idle max speed, it's going to be the maximum is going to be 0.2. If you find that the character slides between 0 and 0.2, maybe you want to drop that down just a little bit lower. But for us, what we have is it's checking if it's greater than that, and if the move speed's less than the speed jog. So it's going to be basically checking that it's within the walking range. Okay, so if it is, then we're basically saying to play the animation, do a crossfade on the animation. So if you remember, when we do animations, when we're doing animations on the 2D side, we're just calling up a sprite. Well, for 3D animation, you can do just simply animation.play, and play would just simply play the animation. However, if you're trying to blend in between the animations, you want them to actually feel like it's fading from one to the other smoothly, then you can actually use the crossfade. Now, for the crossfade, there's also, let it come up so you can see it, there's also a length, a fade length. By default, it's set to 0.3. So you don't have to actually define it. You can use the default option for it. Alright, and then the last part, looking at this, it looks like they're calling up a function called message. Now the message function, it looks like it just takes one argument, one parameter here. If I go down to where function's at, where the function method message is at, notice it's just an overloaded function. It's got one to hold a string, a float, and an integer. Inside of it, you can see that it's actually calling up a debug log, and it's just printing whatever is inside of here. Now, the reason for doing this one, if you think about it for a second, I could just go through and call this up anywhere I want. However, I don't have control directly just to turn this on and off. And it's like, well, I could easily turn it on and off through code, but what I want to be able to do is have a checkbox inside my inspector. So if we go over to the inspector real fast, and scroll down to the bottom, you notice we have the debug mode, and we have the little checkbox right here. Well, again, the advantage to this is that as a designer, I can go in here and say, okay, I want to see my debug options. Well, I can click on that, and then when I play, you'll notice that now I have animation state idle, and then I can actually go through all the states. If I decide to start walking the character, I'll go to walk, it'll go to jog, I can go to walk again, go to run, turn left, turn right, go back to idle. So this one just allows it to keep up with it, but without having to worry about commenting things in and out over here. I just focus on the one checkbox right there. Alright. So we have our message options right there. They'll just allow us to print whatever type we want to have through it. So this one looks really simple. It looks like we could actually do the sprint. Now, the sprint, you kind of see the walk, jog, and run. Those basically, the idea behind those sound more like a standard just joystick movement, where it's just checking for the basic axis amount and just trying to blend in between each stage. The sprint, usually you kind of think of a sprint as something where you have to have a button push and the movement of the player. So how about we do a little bit extra with it? Now for the words, if you notice, you see where it says like can jog, can run, can walk. Well, let's go ahead and just take a guess here. If I was to say that it's the function sprint, it's probably going to be called can sprint. Now we could go up here real fast and check on the booleans, and it looks like can sprint. So if we go back down to here, let's say we're going to start off with the function sprint. We're going to go ahead and just do a quick check. We'll say that the check is going to be for can sprint. And if we can sprint, then we want to do, and this is where starting off, you're looking at code for the first time. There's lots of stuff to be looking at. Let's just go ahead and we don't even know what update is looking for. We don't know what update move direction is looking for. None of those things. What we're doing is just looking at right here and going, well, they're calling this. It makes sense. I could probably call that again. So we're going to give this a try. We'll start off with this one. It's going to be checking for what based on these consistency here is the move speed. So we'll say if move speed, and the move speed option, let's go ahead and say that it's going to be speed. And looking at these, speed walk, speed jog. Do you think it could be speed what? Well, speed, each one, this is speed walk, which means it's going to be greater than speed walk. Well, that means in order to have the sprint work, it has to be greater than speed run. Alright, so we have our speed run. And then we also have, let's check for that it has to be in speed. The move speed is also going to be less than, or at least equal to, and this is going to be our speed sprint. Okay. Now, what this is saying, just like the other ones say up there, is that if the sprint itself, the move speed is greater than the run, and it's either less than or equal to the sprint speed, that it's going to actually say this is a true statement. and we could play our sprint animation. Now, based on this right here, it would play it, but let's say we wanted to actually add that extra element, so you have to push a button so that you get a boost while you're running, so it goes into that sprint mode. So let's go ahead and just do another end. So it has, all of these are going to have to be equal to true here. We'll do an input, and just a regular get button. So the get button means that you have to actually have it pushed and held down. So we'll say if get button, and the one that we'll probably use is the Fire 1. Fire 1, I believe, by default is Control to do that with. If you're using a Windows and it's getting buggy with Control and arrow keys, then just switch the Control option inside your player input to Shift. Alright, so we have the Fire option. So, our statement is saying if it is greater than our run speed, if the player is going faster than run, but less than or equal to the sprint, and the get button for fire is true, then we want to basically play our animation files. So, the animation for sprint. Well, from the looks of the one above, we've got the animation, and we'll go ahead and just do the crossfade. And if you notice from the crossfade, we have this one base. It's just basically saying phase the animation with name animation over a period of time. So we'll say yes, we want to do a crossfade. Now the crossfade for the sprint, if we're just looking at the stuff above, what have we got here? Animation walk, animation jog. So there's a good chance it's ANI sprint. And if you do the dot, we'll wind up just using the name. Now, this part of it, again, I'm looking at this going, well, okay, it looks like it'll work, but what is this? What is this? Where is it? If we jump back up to here, we'll see that the variable animation sprint, which is right here, is actually an animation clip. Alright, now the animation clip, if we go back over to our inspector, we'll go down to here till we see the animation sprint, and it's actually calling up the sprint animation clip file named sprint. So for us, down inside of here, that means that when these all read true, that it's actually going to play. It's going to crossfade, so it's going to fade this in. It's going to fade in the sprint option for us. Alright, then we want to write a message. We'll just say for the message, we'll say animation state and colon sprint, and save that out right there. Alright, now we could save this, and then we could run, and if we ran, let's go ahead and push play. When the player is at full speed running, when you push the button, you'll notice he goes to a sprint stage now, and he runs and plays his sprint motion. Alright, so he can actually go through all the levels from run to sprint, from idle to sprint now. Alright, so our first one, putting in the sprint works. The one catch though, this works, but remember, inside the function right here, sprint, did we call up sprint anywhere inside of our scripts? Well, this is where a little bit further research inside of the structure of the code that's already been set up might kind of come in handy. If I was to open up my update, say for instance I go in here and check out my update, I could go in and go, well, I don't see anything that's actually calling up any of the functions down here specifically, but what I do see is a set gravity and update move direction. So if I go to my update move direction, alright, so in the update move direction, when you come down, you'll notice that there is the sprint function being called right here. So this one, if I don't have this one actually set, say for instance we add a new function down here, maybe we did one that was super sprint. Well, if I did a super sprint, did a whole lot of programming down here, but I didn't call it up inside of update, I didn't call it up inside of my update move direction, then it's not going to actually play. So for instance, my sprint being commented out, you know, say this is the first time I was doing this, I didn't really know if I was doing it right. I go in here and I had a sprint on him, But notice he never goes to the sprint stage. He runs, but he never gets to the sprint. That's the part where you want to make sure, if you don't see something working, this is where when you start investigating more of the code, you start looking at what's happening. All of the function calls are happening right inside of here, and we want to make sure that every time we do a new function, if we do one that's not in this list, we need to actually add it to the list. Alright. So we have our sprint. Let's go ahead and add our comments to it. For the sprint side of it, we can just say it's the enable sprinting. So we're just going to check for this one that the speed is within the sprint range. And button fire is pressed. So this, we just play animation. And then this one, we're just saying that we're going to print the current animation state. Alright, so that does the first part for us. We're able to put in a sprint. We assigned it to a button as well as to a check between the sprint speeds. And then we play in the animation for the sprinting.